I was at a book fair and there was a woman who came up and started browsing through my book, and she looked at it for about 10 seconds and then flung it down and said to me, "Well, I'm over 50, too late for me." And I just thought, wow, that is a really unsuccessful person.
Hello and welcome to another episode of A Conversation with Carl. Please remember to follow, like, and subscribe for the latest content. Today I am honored and excited to welcome world-renowned personal branding and communication expert Dorie Clark. Dorie has been named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. She's a premier consultant and a keynote speaker and is the author of The Long Game, Reinventing You and Stand Out, which Inc. magazine crowned the #1 leadership book of the year. Welcome, Dorie Clark, to the conversation.
Thank you, Carl. Glad to be here.
Thanks for doing this. So let's start with your background. You're tremendously accomplished, graduating from college at just 18 and building an incredible career since. Do you think your career trajectory and how you view achievement would be vastly different if you had taken a more traditional educational path?
Well, I think that in terms of my own situation, what has informed it was that mostly I think that a lot of people, probably could do something similar to what I did. I was just uniquely motivated because I grew up in a very small town, and I was frustrated being there. I felt like the opportunities were limited. It felt a little stifling to me. And so from a young age, I was just really keen to get out and do something else and do something bigger. And so I think, there's a quote by Nietzsche, which is, "A big enough why can endure any how." And I think that's really true. And so I have a lot of respect for people who kind of carve their own path. I did it in some ways non-traditionally because I went to college early, but in some ways traditionally because I did go to college and then graduate school. But I really am impressed with a lot of young entrepreneurs today, or older entrepreneurs for that matter, people who are building businesses and experimenting using the power of AI to create something, which now a lot of the barriers have been removed. You don't even have to code in order to be a programmer now. So I think it's an exciting time.
But you can make change at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, my first book was called Reinventing You. And one moment which came after I wrote the book that I'll never forget is I was at a book fair. There was this kind of book fair where they had a bunch of authors and we were manning the booths, and people would come up and you'd chat with them, and if they bought a copy, you'd sign it. And there was a woman who came up and started browsing through my book, and she looked at it for about 10 seconds and then flung it down and said to me, "Well, I'm over 50, too late for me." And I just thought, wow, that is a really unsuccessful person. Because if you have that attitude, when statistically you're going to live at least 30 to 35 more years, you may well live 50 more years. If you think you're washed up at 50, I really don't know what to say, because you have decades and decades, and I think anyone can do anything at any time.
You have to keep changing. When you look at why people live, not the only reason, I'll say, but why people live long is it's the ones that are reinventing themselves, are finding new things for them, are finding new interests, and keep changing and keep rebranding themselves.
I think that's so true. How is that applied in your own life, Carl? Tell me your reinvention story.
Well, about a year ago, I decided to start a podcast. And
Love it.
that is what I've reinvented myself. I was writing questions and producing for so many different people. And then I thought to myself, why am I producing for them? Why can't I produce for myself? And it's not hard to use Riverside, and it's not hard to create my own podcast. And now we're well over 100,000 views and streams. And in 9 months, we're really growing.
It's so great. What have you learned being a podcast host as compared to being the power behind the throne?
What have I learned? That's an interesting question. What I find fascinating, not about building the business, but I like having conversations with people. And one of the reasons I got into this business was I wanted to find out the how all the time. Like, why? Why did somebody do this? How did they do this? Why did they do this? It was always my curiosity. And how can I figure out how to do this all the time, like talk to people. And I want to learn everything about why people do what they do. And so this was a perfect opportunity in the next segue into figuring this out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that.
So that is how like I started to brand myself differently. But how do you define a personal brand, and what are the first steps to actually building one?
So I think people overcomplicate personal brand in many ways. Fundamentally, it's just what do people think of you? And it's a synonym for reputation. And I think that because the term personal brand in some ways is deliberately provocative, when the term was coined back, nearly 30 years ago now by the management consultant Tom Peters, there was a cover story in Fast Company magazine called The Brand Called You. And it was done up like a Tide detergent box with sort of the implication that people can brand themselves the way that companies brand their products. And I think that in some ways it was deliberately poking the bear a little bit, because people often react to that idea. Well, I'm an individual. I'm not going to package myself the way you'd sell soap. But I think that if we peel it back a step and say, you know what, people have always been concerned about their reputation, and they should be concerned about their reputation, because if people think badly of you, there's not going to be good outcomes. You want to have people think of you the way that you think of yourself. Obviously, there'll always be some kind of a gap between those things, but you want that gap theoretically to be as small as possible. And if you expend just a modicum of energy to try to figure out how to make that gap the absolute minimum, then your life and your career is going to go much better, and it's a worthwhile investment.
How does social media play into this? You could get canceled at any moment for no reason, and people can misunderstand you. You can say something that I think people can take out of context.
I mean, social media is certainly an amplifier of everything. It's an amplifier of good things. It's an amplifier of bad things. And we know from now having 30 plus years of experience with the internet in general, that people have many fewer inhibitions about saying things online to strangers than they do about saying things to someone's face. I mean, I'll post a video and people will insult all kinds of things. I've been making a push now recently on Instagram, so I've been making videos every day on Instagram, and people, some people are very nice and say thank you, this is great. Plenty of people, will actually take time out of their day to be, this is boring, this is too long. I'm like, wow, what does it say about you that you're actually taking the time to to write that something is boring? People, will insult my appearance. I mean, it's just an endless stream of things of people who have too much time on their hands. But I think the key thing, I mean, yes, at a certain point you have to develop a thick skin, but what is most crucial around people who are starting on the personal brand journey is that the thing they're afraid of is that they are afraid that they will be insulted by people, they'll be canceled, it'll be some big brouhaha, when, 100,000 to 1. What is more likely than that is actually the opposite, which is that you will be ignored, and that will feel painful because people are not paying attention. And I think that's the thing that we have to grapple with is that for a long time, if you are trying to raise your profile in some way, it will not work. And you have to keep doing it and doing it. And it's that continuous effort that makes it possible, and you've got to persevere through that in order to get to the other side. But the other distinction that I want to draw is that for the vast majority of people, unless you want to ascend to some kind of position of thought leadership, which, some people do, and it's great, but for most people, you need to have a personal brand that is enough. And what I mean by enough is if you don't really want to, have a bbig profile, the key thing is just, if you want to get a job, you want someone to look you up on Google or type your name into, nowadays, like an LLM, some kind of a ChatGPT or something like that. And you want them to have enough information so that they see that you are a credible human being. And that's it. And as long as you can do that, I call it the minimum effective dose of social media to accomplish the goals that you want. And for most people, that is absolutely fine. And unless you're really wild about it, there's no way you're going to get canceled.
What I have noticed is that people do comment on some of my podcasts, and some of the comments are really mean, but I always want to respond to them. Thank you for listening. You can be mean. It's okay. At least you took the time to listen. And I would say,
ultimately the joke's on them, right? It's like,
Yeah.
If they want to hate listen, at least they're listening. Amazing.
In your mind, what truly makes a great leader?
So the ultimate measure in terms of a good leader is, I would say, twofold. It is, number one, are they able to accomplish the goals that they're setting out to accomplish? And number two, do people actually like working for them? Because if you can get those two pieces, the thing about a leader is that almost always they are not doing the work themselves. They're leading other people, and so other people are the instrument of that work. So you have to have both pieces. You need to be a leader because you can have a leader that everyone loves working for because you don't enforce any standards and everybody eats bonbons all day. That's not really a great leader. But if you can have both, where you're getting the things done and people like it and enjoy it and feel motivated and feel like they're part of a good enterprise, that's fantastic.
And then I would say a chief complaint I hear from people in both their personal and professional lives is that they feel unheard. But what I think they're saying is, you're disagreeing with me. How do you fix that?
Yeah, it's a tricky situation because, of course, sometimes employees have great ideas and they are not listened to, which is unfortunate. I mean, you do have leaders sometimes that are so in love with their own opinions, they don't want to listen to anybody else, or they just sometimes they feel threatened. And if they feel like someone has the better idea or someone, might be smarter in general or smarter about a particular thing, their ego can't handle that. So they squelch it down. That's entirely plausible. Those things do happen. But it is also equally true that sometimes someone might be wedded to a concept or a way of doing things, and it's just not feasible. The leader might have context that you don't about the organizational mission. They might have looked into it, and it's just not the priority, or it's just not going to work, and the employee can't let that go. And so ultimately, I think that it's a matter of, as best we can, right? This is very hard as humans. Intellectual honesty on all sides. I am a big fan of transparency. And so one of the problems is that a lot of leaders don't take the time to properly contextualize things for people. So it is quite possible that whatever this person's brilliant idea is has been tested, has been tried, has been war gamed or whatever, and it just really won't work. Or it might work, but it is, there's a lot of other things that are more important. And they don't have the context to understand why that is. They don't know what you do. And so taking the time as a leader to slow down and to walk them through it so that they actually feel heard and so that they feel like, okay, this wasn't summarily dismissed for no reason. This was dismissed after considering it. That can make a big difference, even if the outcome is the same.
And one of the things we'll talk about in people's personal lives, you hear this all the time within politics. Like, you're not listening to me, and then and then they make their point, and then they'll say the same point that they've made three times. And you're like, yes, we are listening to you. We hear you. You've made the same point three times. And you don't want to say that to someone. But I think that becomes the struggle of how to make people feel heard.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's such a classic pattern, right? I mean, people have this in marriages and things like that too. Is, if you don't feel heard, you are going to keep saying the thing because you're like, "No, but this time you're going to listen. Maybe it's the fourth time, maybe it's the 18th time you're
Right.
going to listen." And it's repetitive and louder. And that doesn't serve anyone. So I think that what we often have to do is just step out of that a little bit. I think I have a colleague who wrote a book, Diana McLean Smith. She wrote a book called The Elephant in the Room, which is one of my favorite books about de-escalating conflict. And what she talks about is really taking a step back if you're in kind of a pitched battle with someone about a topic that just won't go away, and really trying to do a meta-analysis of, okay, what is happening here? You do this and then I do that. And kind of what is the pattern that we're in? Why do we keep locking horns? And is there a way that we can do a pattern interrupt? And I think it's an interesting question because, all right, clearly, clearly the thing that I'm doing to tell you, yes, I heard, is not being effective. So I have to think of something else. And so, maybe it's actually sitting down and doing the things that all the getting to yes people suggest about, well, okay, collaboratively, like what's the larger goal you're trying to get at? Maybe the method won't work, but maybe the goal is a valid goal. Is there a different way that we could do it, etc.? Yeah, I'm curious for you, Carl. What does a good leader look like to you?
Someone that listens to everybody, someone that explains to people where we're going or how we're going to get there. My thought process is, you don't have to agree with everybody, but you have to make people feel heard. I'll tell you this, Oprah says this, but I'll say this after every interview that I do. People, and while Riverside is uploading, people always ask me, was that good? Was I good? Like, it's the same question. People want to feel, and Oprah says this, they want to feel like they matter. And I think that that is what, when I'm talking to different people, they all want to feel like their idea, what I have said, is important. So, and I think that that's what leadership is listening to people, trying to figure out how we're getting from here to there. And when you're working at a company, you don't work for a company, you work for a person. You work for a boss, right? And your boss has to respect you. And if you respect that, I will tell you a story. I used when I worked for Al Roker, every morning Al Roker would ask me how my daughter is. And that was about connecting to me. When I worked with him, he asked me. That's to me, that is part of leadership too, is hearing you, seeing you, and validating you.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
The professional landscape is different and it's changed in the last 25 to 30 years. People are now working in many companies. They used to work in one company. What has driven this massive shift?
Well, there's a lot of ways to trace all of this back. I mean, in a lot of ways, it really began in the early '90s. So this has been a long brewing phenomenon. I mean, in the sort of the 90 to 95 era, that was really the first time that there were mass layoffs. I mean, it was the era of famously, chainsaw Al Dunlap, and even institutions, like an IBM or whatever, were laying off eye-popping numbers of people. And I think that it shook people in a different way. This was not the contract that was expected. And people realized, oh, I might be loyal to this company, but I'm not sure if they're loyal to me. And so, that begins a little bit of a cascade where you start to realize, okay, I should not leave it in their hands, my career trajectory. I might need to take more responsibility for this. And the interesting thing, famously, right, there are medical advances in research, and then they say it takes 10 to 20 years for those advances to sort of spread out into the population and to have doctors actually start to regularly share them, because it takes a long time with knowledge bases and people staying current and the dissemination of information. And similarly, from that economic shift in the 90s, it took probably 20 years for the knowledge to really seep in. I mean, even probably into the 2010s, there actually really were still some people who were like, you know, but I shouldn't have to worry about, my career development. The company should do that for me. And it was interesting because I actually was brought in by a lot of companies who would have me speak and be part of their career week or their career month or something like that, because the message that needed to be transmitted was like, dear God, no, don't rely on the company. This is a bad idea. We can't promise that anymore. And it's not about an individual company. It's about any company. We cannot promise that anymore. The individual needs to take more responsibility in terms of thinking about, where do I want my career to go? What is the next job that I want? Maybe it's an upward move, but even that's a little hard these days. So maybe it's an interesting lateral move, but to be more self-directed. I think in a lot of ways it is similar to the shift that occurred between, everybody having pension plans and then a shift to 401ks, which, not coincidentally, this was happening in the late 80s. Around that time period, that 10-year time period from the mid 80s to the mid 90s, was a very big shift in terms of the sense of whether we have this kind of benevolent paternalism versus an individualism in terms of careers. And I think now people get it and they understand a little bit more, but we can't emphasize it enough. You are the captain of your career. The company absolutely is not. You need to be driving it and telling the company what development you want and need. And oftentimes they're glad to do it because they want you to be the best employee that you can be. But your manager doesn't have the time or the knowledge or the bandwidth to be meticulously plotting it out with you. It's a cherry on top, if they will, but don't count on it.
It's really interesting because when I started, and every time there was a layoff, they would always say, we're family. The people that got to stay behind were always family. And I would always think, why would you do that to family? Why would you send them packing? Now it's changed to where I've heard this a few times now, that we're a team. And sometimes you need to make trades in the team. And a team, and it's different because the thought process is before I think in the 90s, you were a family. This is who you worked with. And then I think today it's like you are a team, and teams are sometimes you need to make trades for the success of the team.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting metaphor. I think pretty apt.
Professional reinvention can feel incredibly overwhelming and laborious. How do we shift our mindset away from that anxiety and turn negative thoughts into positive action?
It certainly can be very confronting for people to do professional reinvention, especially because, some of the time professional reinvention is chosen. Oh, I'm excited. I'm moving into this new thing that I really want to do. And certainly that can feel a little scary, but hopeful for people. But a lot of the time, professional reinvention is forced upon us, and that is just not fun. It's never fun when we are forced rapidly to adapt to a condition that we didn't choose. And I say that from experience. Like you, Carl, I came from the media world, although my tenure was much more brief. I started my career as a print journalist, and I got laid off a year into my tenure. And I had wanted to make a career as a journalist, and I tried very desperately to get other jobs, and there were none to be had. I guess I did receive a job offer for a kind of like crappy, much lesser than position that was not going to be feasible. But ultimately, I had to change professions. And that was something that I did feel was very much forced upon me involuntarily. So I think part of it is separating out the disappointment and the hurt and having to realign to come up with a different vision, and then moving forward and saying, all right, well, this is what I need to do. That being said, a lot of people, and I'm sure, everybody who's listening either themselves has been through a forced reinvention or they certainly know someone who's had something similar. And almost always people say, you know what, actually, I learned a lot. I had a positive outcome because it forces you to do some things that actually are very beneficial, which is question assumptions. If things are going along and going pretty well, you don't question your assumptions. You're like, nope, these are working great. But actually, periodically, it is a good thing sometimes to say, what do I want out of a career? What do I want my work-life balance to look like? What do I want to learn? Who do I want to surround myself with? What skills do I want to either gain or deploy more? These are pretty good questions for all of us to be asking. It does force us to learn new skills. I mean, just this year, I was telling you about my Instagram experiment. I have had to learn, do Instagram sounds like one thing. It's not. It's like 400 things. I've
It
had to
is
learn
400
about
things.
yeah, I've had to learn about like scripting effectively. I've had to learn video editing. I've had to learn, how do I frame a shot appropriately? Like, so it's like
Yeah.
filmmaking technique. I mean, filmmaking sounds a little lofty for an Instagram video, but nonetheless, it's similar principles. So, like, I feel kind of proud because I've learned a lot of new things. So, at the end of this process, even if it's not chosen, it actually can feel beneficial if you let yourself get into the mindset of focusing on, okay, I've actually done some things that are pretty cool.
Well, in my reinvention, I wouldn't be talking to you if I didn't do it. And I've decided, not my boss, but I've decided who do I get to talk to every day? How do I make my mark? And what am I going to learn today? And one of the things that I've started every day is like, what do I want to learn? And
Yeah.
that's how I begin my process. And that's how from all my conversations that I've had now over the last year with different people, the question has always been, what am I going to learn from this? And what's my takeaway? And
That's
that's
so
what I've
cool. What have you wanted to learn, Carl? Like what are the veins that you're diving into?
Well, one of the things is I felt when I was at Business Insider, when I was at the Weather Channel with Wake Up with Al, or at CBS News, we had a specific audience. And I think what I see now is everyone's in a bubble. And what I wanted to do was open up the conversation to different people so that if you're listening, if you're in a bubble, you might not. I don't want everybody to agree, but what I want everybody to do is be open to listening to different conversations. And that's one of the things that I've always brought to my work when I worked at all those places. I was like, how can I challenge conventional wisdom? And that is the one thing that I wanted to do and I've always done. So that's why what I open up today is when I'm sitting here, I'm thinking to myself, what can I learn today? What can be different? And that's what I've been learning a lot from different people, from seeing different ideas. You know what I've learned about it, and we can talk about AI next because AI is such a big deal. But what I've learned from AI is that AI is different for so many different people. And what I found interesting is like everyone talks about AI in medicine and how it's going to cure things. It's more like will your doctor be able to stand up to AI? And will your doctor be able to say, I think your treatment's going to be different than the AI suggests? And that to me is fascinating in the conversation. So
Yeah, that is really interesting. And also the piece that I was alluding to before about the lag time about the dissemination of information. I mean, the great news is that with AI, that has been compressed so much. A lot of things can move so much faster from research into practice, which is an exciting piece as well.
I feel like a lot of us are in bubbles today. How do we get out of that bubble?
And you mean like an information bubble?
Information bubble. If you're liberal, you're in your liberal bubble. If you're conservative, you're in your conservative bubble. If you get your news from the New York Times, you don't get it from the Wall Street Journal. If you get it from the Washington Post, you don't get it from there.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm gonna yes and it a little bit in the
Yeah.
sense that sometimes it can be a positive in the sense that there's in the world of speakers there's this famous Jim Rohn quote, which is you are the average of the five people that you spend the most time with, which I think is
Oh, that's
probably
such a great
pretty apt.
quote.
Yeah, it really
It's a great
is.
quote. You're the average of five people you spend the most time with. Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. And I think in that sense it's useful because if you are choosing your bubble carefully, it actually can be incredibly beneficial. If all of your friends are really healthy and they work out all the time and they eat carefully and things like that, of course that's going to nudge you in that direction. You'd be such a weird outlier if you were, scarfing McDonald's all the time. So if you're choosing to be around people who value lifelong learning, or choosing people whose values you're consciously aligning with that make you better, I think that's a fantastic thing to do. But what you are pointing to, which I think is also true, is that unless we are very careful about how we're choosing it can become an echo chamber that is very hard to escape. And the worst part, i- if we are not acknowledging that we are in a bubble. Because if you're the proverbial fish in the water and you're like, what's water? That's no good because you need to understand it's a big world. There's a lot of different perspectives out there. I mean, certainly I know it is mystifying to so many people how, quote unquote, the other side politically, whichever side that is, can possibly think the things they think. But it makes perfect sense in that
In the
bubble and in that
bubble.
worldview.
In the
Yeah.
bubble and in the worldview. And I see this all the time. People will say that thank you for having this conversation with me because I'm opening their mind to something different. And that is what the whole point of this was when I started. Let's have conversations. As we wrap up, is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
I feel like this has been a wonderful conversation. Speaking of conversations, no, we've covered so much great ground, Carl, and I think that I respect what you're doing because you are creating a vehicle for going just a little bit deeper with some of the things that we're talking about in terms of life and society and getting better. Just to follow up a tiny bit on the point about the bubble, I think something that's been very interesting for me. I moved to Miami about 5 years ago, and something that has been fascinating is that I have noticed, I think, Miami has lots of problems. The famous saying about it's a sunny place with shady people, I think is largely true. But one thing that I think is actually very good about Miami is that I feel like I have a surprising number of politically diverse friends here. And part of the reason why I think that that is possible, to sort of escape at least that facet of a bubble, is that in Miami, I think that there's an ethos that used to be relatively pervasive in American political life. I mean, people talk about, in the old days, quote unquote, and I mean, we're going back really old. Let's say like 70s and before. A lot of people would have friends and they wouldn't even know if they were Republican or
Yeah.
Democrat. It just like would not come up. It was not a thing. And I think the central element of that was that your friendship was based on other things. It wasn't an identity based friendship. It was a
Pickleball.
friendship based, yeah, it was based on your neighbors, or you do something together, or you just,
Yeah.
you like them for other things. And I think that interestingly, part of why that maybe is a little bit more possible in Miami is that a lot of political affiliations are actually based on things like foreign policy as compared to domestic policy, which is just,
Yeah.
it's like a little bit off from how the conventional conversation in American politics goes. And so it scrambles a little bit what it means to be a Republican or Democrat. And so people really can just be friends and have it not be a thing, which I respect and I would like there to be more of.
That is very important. Dory Clark, thank you so much for joining me. Tell me all the books.
Thank you. My books?
Yeah, tell me your books.
Ah,
What are
well,
your
the
books?
most
Yeah.
recent one is The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World, and we also spent a bit of time talking about this one, Reinventing You. So those are the key ones. We've got Entrepreneurial You and Standout as well. And thank you so much, Carl, for having me on.
You're very welcome. And thank you out there for listening. As always, let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comment section. And until next time, everyone, be safe